I'm excited to talk to you today about the latest release of Triad 6. Now, Triad 6 represents many months of ETI engineering effort, culminating in a major revision of our best-in-class OSS application. As you'll soon learn, Triad 6 contains a host of new features on top of several significant infrastructure changes, which will serve to carry Triad customers and ETI well into the future. Let me begin with a brief glimpse into some of the major changes newly introduced with Triad 6. I'm happy to report that with this release, Triad has been fully containerized. There are several benefits for having done so, but for now, I want to focus on the fact that Triad can now be deployed anywhere, including in the cloud. This means it can be loaded into Azure, Amazon Web Services, or Google Cloud. It can still be run locally or in a data center. The choice is yours. Triad as an application, with the help of Kubernetes, a specialized container orchestration software, is now self-monitoring and self-healing. This means that if a container running a part of the application runs into a problem, that container can be rebuilt before the problem further impacts the use of Triad, all without system admin intervention. In addition, Kubernetes is also responsible for optimizing resource utilization. As such, it will move containers around as necessary to get the most out of each node in the cluster. With Triad 6, ETI has added an entirely new data visualization and analytics capability. This is split into two parts, one for system monitoring and one for logging. And finally, Triad is ready now for the challenges of tomorrow. We've achieved this in several ways, but I'm most excited to talk to you today about our new paradigm for building controllers. More on this in a minute. As you'll soon see, and I hope that you agree, there are lots of advantages to moving to Triad 6. Some that are worth calling out. Freedom to deploy anywhere, including the cloud, significantly improved security, better utilization of server resources, easy to understand visual representations of system metrics and performance, and proactive alarming and alerting. And finally, more system uptime. As I go through the rest of the presentation, I'll try to call out the new features and functions to which these benefits are linked. Speaking of new features, let's take a look at some of the more significant additions with Triad 6. As with any release, there are several new controllers that we're happy to now have in Triad's inventory. What is equally exciting is how these controllers were built. Our integration paradigm has several benefits, not the least of which is being able to deliver and modify controllers without having to install Triad patches or version updates. While not technically a feature of the application itself, the new recommended deployment model brings with it, for the first time, high availability and fault tolerance, and as always, data replication. With Triad 6, we have a new, more secure method for authenticating and authorizing users. We've added a whole new layer of active performance monitoring, coupled with easy to digest instrument visualizations, alarming and alerting. There's a new logging system that makes locating and parsing log entries that much easier. And tying it all together is a comprehensive web-based user portal, which greatly simplifies access to Triad and all its corresponding pieces and extensions. Let's spend some time now and go through each of these features in more detail. Starting off the list of new controllers are positron access and ready links. Both of these interfaces enable provisioning control over customer-facing ports on G.hn network gear. G.hn has eclipsed G.fast as the prevalent solution for MDUs and large buildings. If you're not familiar with this technology, I encourage you to give it a look, especially if you're in need of an affordable and easy to deploy solution for delivering high-speed data services to MDUs and other large buildings constrained by the limits of legacy copper wiring. The Plume controller automates the onboarding of subscribers to the Plume service for managed Wi-Fi. Following my presentation, we have an interview that was reported yesterday with Scott Young of Service Electric Cablevision, where Scott will talk about SECV's use of Plume, in addition to using TiVo as their new IPTV solution. The free radius controller can be used in support of a third-party implementation of free radius or with ETI's newly available full implementation of the free radius suite. I'll be talking about that more in a minute. The other two controllers on this list, Allianz and SeaChange, are effectively rewrites of older integrations using the latest vendor-supplied API. These new APIs are much more secure than the older APIs that they replaced. As an extension, so too are the new Triad controllers for both Allianz and SeaChange. And it's for this reason that I would encourage anybody who's using either of these to look at moving to the latest gen of those controllers. While not complete, it's worth mentioning that we're building integrations right now to Adtran Mosaic Cloud and Nokia Altiplano. These are on par with Calix SMX and are used in support of the latest SDN compliant network equipment from the big three. Once finished, these controllers will be the latest in a long line of fiber controllers that we'll have in the Triad inventory. While we're on the topic of controllers, I want to call out three important Triad extensions. The first is free radius. Not to be confused with the free radius controller, this is the actual implementation of the full free radius suite, including the radius server. Radius servers are typically used for authentication and authorization of broadband network users. We can stand this up within the Triad environment, or we can put it in a separate environment. It will really come down to the size and the decisions around that, but we can work with you to come up with the right plan. What's exciting about this is that it speaks to the kind of things that ETI has done and will continue to do to its product portfolio in the months and years to come. A little later in today's agenda, you'll be hearing from my good friend and colleague, David Tidd, as he talks about the Triad roadmap and some of the exciting stuff that he's got in the works. The next two items on the list, OBAPI and BLS, are not new with Triad 6, but are worth reviewing as they both play a pivotal role in our integration paradigm. The OBAPI controller is Triad's webhook for notifying external applications when something has changed within Triad's database. Examples would include things like adds, changes, or deletes of subscriber records, device records, or phone records. Triad supports multiple concurrent running instances of OBAPI, each with its own unique orientation and configuration. OBAPI can be thought of as a highly configurable controller that can be tuned to meet the needs of some specific endpoint. The business logic service is an ETI-built controller fabrication and runtime environment that is external to Triad. It allows for the rapid creation of provisioning configuration files using a no-code, low-code approach that handles the communications with third-party APIs. There are numerous tools and advantages of using BLS for building integrations and running them once built. It's fast, efficient, and easy to maintain. For these reasons, ETI has shifted all controller development to using a combination of OBAPI and BLS, just like you see in the diagram here. Our new method for writing controllers makes use of these two components, where the REST commands generated by OBAPI are received by BLS and then converted into the appropriate commands for whatever the endpoint is that it's talking to on the other end. ETI engineering has been using OBAPI and BLS the last couple of years to write controllers. All the controllers I listed a couple slides back were written this way. One significant approach that I mentioned a minute ago about doing this is we can now deliver controllers to customers without having to first install a new Triad version or to update existing controllers without having to deliver a patch. We simply need to provide a new version of the controller's pipeline config file. Since BLS is completely external to Triad, the version of the pipeline config file, or doc, is not tied to the Triad version. In time, we'll be doing more to grant customers with direct access to BLS, the purpose of which will be to empower you to write and/or maintain your own integrations if you choose to do so. We have a couple of customers right now who are conducting beta trials of the tools as a product. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, one of the big changes that we made to Triad was to break it into smaller pieces, referred to as microservices, and put them inside containers. A good example of that would be the controllers that we were just talking about. We can deliver controllers now as microservices within a container. By putting Triad into containers, we can now deploy it anywhere. Better still, containers can be moved around as necessary to take full advantage of available resources. Managing all of this, the container builds and the assignments, is a special bit of orchestration software called Kubernetes. Think of Kubernetes as the brains. Not only can it create containers and deploy them, it monitors the containers while they're running, and it will take action if necessary. If, for example, a container crashes or is showing signs of being overloaded, Kubernetes will instantiate a new container, either replace the one that has failed or take some of the load off of an existing container. Coupled with our new deployment model, this makes Triad 6 the first highly available and fault-tolerant solution in ETI's history. It also provides a mechanism for real-time data replication. The diagram on this slide shows ETI's recommended production deployment configuration. Made possible through the use of containers and Kubernetes, this architecture calls for 5 nodes arranged in a 3-2 configuration, with 3 nodes running the app and 2 supporting the database. In this config, work can be distributed as necessary among the 3 application nodes, and as already mentioned, through the use of Kubernetes. New containers will be created on the fly in the event of a problem, and the app will continue to run even if an entire node fails. In this particular arrangement, with 3 nodes running the app, any one of those 3 can fail, and Triad will continue to run. So that gives you one fault. For larger systems, you can add additional nodes in pairs. You would always have an odd number for additional faults. So if you wanted to have a 2-fault resilient system, you would need 5 nodes. If you wanted a 3-fault tolerant system, you would need to have 7. On the database side, there are 2 supporting nodes, one for the primary database and one for the secondary. As changes are written to the primary database, they're also recorded in the secondary. In doing so, any possibility of data loss is more or less eliminated should the primary fail, as the secondary will have an exact replica of the data from the production primary box. For non-production systems like tests, a 2-node configuration will generally suffice, where you've got 1 application node and 1 DB node. This comes with the understanding that there is no fault tolerance and there's no data replication. It's for this reason that we don't recommend the 2-node configuration for production. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the other features that are new with Triad 6. First up is our shift to Keycloak for Triad user authentication and authorization. Keycloak is an open source identity access management tool. What this means is that Triad user credentials and permissions are no longer managed within Triad. Instead, we do that through Keycloak. Keycloak offers many advantages, including support for single sign-on, single sign-off, 2-factor authentication, LDAP and Active Directory support, and password policy management. Coming back to the topic of security, once a user has been authenticated by Keycloak, they're issued a temporary token. This token is shared with Triad. Any requests made by the user during their Triad session that do not have the correct token or have no token at all will be rejected out of hand. This is just one example of how we've improved Triad's overall security. I'm really excited to tell you about these next two features: system monitoring with visualization and instrumentation, and proactive alerting. To the first item, we've added dozens of monitors to Triad, all with the same basic goal in mind: to provide insight as to the performance health of the environment, the application, and the operation. Each of these monitors is paired with a visual instrument to facilitate rapid understanding of the state of a metric or indicator. As this slide shows, we have an example of an environment monitor with insight as to the state of Kubernetes, both present and past. The inclusion of time series graphs and charts is pervasive. This is extremely helpful when researching or troubleshooting issues, as the graphs make it easy to spot when a problem started or stopped. The next slide shows an example of an application monitor with visibility into controllers and controller queues. Down the road, system admins will be able to see queue counts from a historical perspective and drill into the details of transactions that may have failed, encountered an error, or simply timed out. What's really cool is the ability to set up alarms and alerts from the various monitors that we've added to Triad. Rather than having to periodically check monitors to make sure that everything is operating in the green, you'll be able to configure the system to send an email or text if something goes off the rails, like when an active controller gets stuck. As Triad system admins, you'll have control over the threshold values, the type of alert, and the frequency with which the alert is sent, all of which will be captured in Triad's new logging system. The new logging system, which consists of Elasticsearch, FluentD, and Kibana, has a powerful search feature coupled with an easy-to-use user interface, making it much easier and faster to locate and isolate log entries than ever before. The new logging system is also responsible for recording various system and environment updates, providing a more detailed view of the overall Triad installation. The final slide shows the new Triad admin portal with a quick launch icons in the different parts of the application and the supporting components. Now, as long as my system is behaving, I like to show that to you in real time now. I want to take you through a tour of the Triad 6 UI from a portal standpoint, so hopefully you can see my screen. I'm going to shut my video off just to conserve the bandwidth, so hopefully you see this. So anyway, you've got these different tiles here that represent the different parts of the system. So we're going to focus initially on the top row. So Launchpad is our web UI. Right next to that, Legacy UI. That is a way to actually run the legacy client, but from within the browser. That's probably okay for system admin purposes, but not necessarily if you've got a lot of people still using the Windows client. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for that. The third tile over, the REST APIs. So we do have a new REST host interface, and we'll take a peek at that two ways. We'll look at it from both the Swagger open API documentation standpoint, as well as we'll look at it from a Postman collections. And then we have the Triad file browser there at the top right, which is a way to actually, through the browser, go into the Samba share directory. So let's take a quick look at what I'm talking about. So I'm going to start with Launchpad. So if I click on that, here we get presented. So this system that we're trying to get into has two different databases or orgs, 1000 and 2000. So I can select either one. I will go ahead and I will pick org 2000. And here we see the sign-on. Now, in my earlier part of the presentation, you heard me mention that we're now using Keycloak. So this sign-on is actually happening through a redirect into Keycloak. So we get to sign on, and again, all of the permissions, role-based security is essentially, being granted. And then there's the token that was exchanged with Triad. So now that I have this here, if I wanted to go into, say, Triad J, go look at, an account, I can do that. That's one option. Or I can go into Manager. Everything is essentially there like it's always been. So pretty straightforward. Now, when I sign out, if I want to switch orgs, I'm going to sign out from org 2000, and that takes me back to the login window. And now I will have to reestablish or re-log in to get into a different database. So if I want to go into org 1000, I will log in again, get new credentials, new token, etc. And now I have the ability to navigate through the system as I did before. So again, it hasn't really changed overall in terms of the navigation. There's just the difference with the user authentication and authorizations. And we'll take a little deeper dive, kind of a peek under the covers of that in a minute. Next, I want to talk about the file browser. So again, for the Samba share directories, under the user cbridge directory, typically most people would access those via the command line. You can now get to them via the browser. So here we see the main root directory, bash. I can navigate in. Here I have an example of a file that's sitting in this directory. If I want to grab this file, I can just come up here, use the download facility, and now the file is sitting there. Similarly, I can get rid of the file and delete it out of the system. And I can put a file back in just using drag and drop. So here we see this text file list 2022-0901 modern controllers. So if I select that, I can drop it right back in, and there you go. So again, all done through the browser, pretty slick, kind of cool, kind of fun. So if I back out, get back into that and just close the browser window, and I'm back to the desktop. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the APIs that I mentioned. So again, for many, many years, we've had a web services API as an inbound interface into Triad. Over the last couple of years, we've been working to stand up REST APIs. So we have REST documented a couple different ways. So if you want to come in through this button, this will get you into the Swagger, which I think was replaced now. It's called, I think, Open API or something like that. And then I can get into the details of my command set. So here we see under the subscriber, fetch information about a subscriber. I can create a new subscriber, delete, I can get the subscriber operations. I can actually, and that's a list of what are the operations that are available to me at any given time, get a list of subscribers, etc. So just to kind of give you some idea, if I click on the put, we can see some of the detail here in the Swagger documentation. Scrolling down, here's the array, the data structure, essentially in a JSON format. And then right here in the inset, we have the schema. So if I want to see the detail of different fields, I can take a look at that as well. And that'll show me kind of what's going on here as I navigate through this. So just one example of the REST API documentation that we have available. Let me close that. And then we have also, obviously, location-based APIs, phone, device. So all the standard APIs that you're used to are there. So again, those are part of the solution set. Now, if I close this and I'm back out of here, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you the APIs again, but this time I'm going to do it as a Postman collection. So this collections button down here. Just a little different view. These are curl commands. So come in, see it, and you can get into the details. We've got some more surround sound as far as additional information. But you can try the commands, play around with them, make sure they work the way you need them to work. Hopefully that all makes sense. If I get out of here. So one thing I didn't mention before, kind of coming off the heels of the presentation that the interview we just heard with Scott Young and Service Electric, we did create, and by we I mean David and his crackerjack engineering team, an implementation of packet cable. So for anybody that runs DOCSIS on their network, historically we've needed a third-party management tool to be a go-between Triad and the CMTS. With packet cable, that's no longer the case. We can actually stand up our own native capability as far as managing the CMTSs and essentially providing that element management capability on top of the DOCSIS implementation. The OBAPI, so in my presentation, you heard me talk about OBAPI, the webhook. So we've got the APIs for that. Again, here's the Postman collection. We get into some of the details about what you can do with these, and anybody that's interested in learning more about OBAPI, we can have a sidebar when it makes sense to do so. But we're happy to sit down and kind of give you a more detailed technical deep dive into that. BLS as well. There's a lot going on here and a lot we can do with it, and we think it has a lot of upside and long-term potential. So pretty bullish on that part of it. Okay. All right, so we've looked at Launchpad, we looked at the rest, we looked at all these different things. Let's take a look at, let's go to, let's think, what do I want to do next? All right, we'll go into Grafana. So this is where we're getting now into all of the instrumentation, the monitoring that's happening within the system, right? So as part of the CI/CD world, another leg of that stool is to do constant monitoring of the application, right? Knowing kind of what's going on at all times. So Prometheus underneath the covers is responsible for that, and what we're seeing here is the visual representation of that monitoring. So as I scroll through, you're going to see there's a whole bunch of different options in this list, but if we just take one kind of at random, this is the Informix dashboard, so we can start to get some visibility into the Triad database as an example. Now, notice the graphs below that, or in the center section there. This is where we start to see information happening over time. So we can start to do some triage of problems from a time perspective. When did the problem start? When did the problem end? When was there a high demand in the system? When was there low demand in the system? But this gives a whole nother dimension to the data that's available to us that we really haven't had previously. Another good one to take a look at here is going to be the Kubernetes overview. So this gives us some examples of what's going on with the different containers and the pods, what's running on the system, is there anything abnormal, is there anything unhealthy, and we can do some drill downs into that information, which is kind of fun. Here again, we see some time series detail, so we can look at things over the course of a few minutes, a few hours, a few days, depending on what makes the most sense from a resolution point of view. SNMP stats right here. This one is interesting because I think this speaks to some of the future potential of being able to get telemetry from not just Triad and the things that are connected to it, but things that are even further out in the network, whether we're talking about OLTs or routers or gateways, right? Starting to pull some stats back, and with the analytics capabilities, really give some power to the bigger picture view of what's happening within the operation. kind of bullish about where that's going to go. Some more of the details there. Here's a summary slide of Triad, seeing kind of what's happening, you know, Triad at a glance, CPU, memory, disk space. And then this final one, which is kind of cool, is where we get into the details of individual controllers. So here we see at the middle layer, what's been happening with the host interface. So, you know, some transaction volumes, response times, etc. And then if we go a little lower, we see into the controllers, right? So what's actually happening for the controllers that are on the system, what's currently waiting to process, how many transactions have processed, are there errors, were there timeouts? And before too long, when we add in the time series component, we'll be able to, you know, use this as a way to go back and troubleshoot problems on a controller specific basis. So lots of good stuff happening here. A little bit below, which we'll come to another day, is we can get into things like VOD, purchase counts, revenue streams, pay-per-view, potential call usage, right? Things that are happening on that front. So you can kind of track your revenues to see how you're tracking over time, according, you know, against your baseline. So that was the system side of it. Now we can take a look at the logging. So as I mentioned before, logging now is what used to be referred to as the ELK stack, Elastic, Logstash, and Kibana. We've modified slightly. We've replaced Logstash with Fluentd. But what this does is, you know, gives you a UI where you can actually go search for logs in the system, and gives you even a visual representation. And once again, we see this in a time series. So if you look at this more closely, we see that the times are broken up. It's by the minute, and then within the minute in 30-second blocks. And we can see the counts of transactions within each 30-second block. And then if I click inside of that block, it'll provide me with a breakdown where now I'm going into the individual seconds, right? So now we've got it at 5-second increments. And then once again, I can click in and I can get into the detail of what's actually happening within that. So each time I do that, I'm zeroing in a little farther, drilling down a little farther, narrowing my scope, until eventually I get down to the 2 transactions that happened at this exact moment with the detail. Notice also that some of these items within the logs themselves are highlighted. Those are keywords, or field names, and I can use those up here in my search, and then I can filter. So if I wanted to, say, isolate by a specific subscriber ID, device ID, work number, monitor number, those are the kind of things I'll be able to do using that tool. All right. Don't want to spend too much more time. I know we want to keep on pace here. So the last thing I think I'll show is just real quickly Keycloak. So this is where we come in. We can subdivide a Triad system into the different orgs and set up the users. So here we see a user, and then we go into the roles. So this is my user role. And if I click on the client roles and I select Triad J, then you can see all the different permissions that I have as part of that user on the system. So lots of good stuff, you know, kind of the next generation of our OSS and where we're going from here. So pretty exciting. If you want to, again, dig into more detail, don't hesitate to reach out, and we will be happy to sit down and talk to you guys more. But we definitely think Triad 6 is the real deal, and we're excited to get our customers moving in this direction, hopefully sooner rather than later. But, you know, I encourage you to reach out to your account rep when you're ready to make that move.